James and I are back, trawling the city for great places to eat and learning about migration journeys from South Asia to London.
Indeed. Hello and welcome to Series 2 of the Migration Menu with me, James Staples, and co-host Luke Heslop.
This series, we explore how migration has transformed food and how food has transformed the places in which we live and call home.
As always, we'll be talking to people about what food from their homeland means to them and why. Learning how food evokes memories of the past and shapes the future. Food is never just about nutrition. It says something fundamental about who we are.
So if you like food, culture and migration stories, alongside some anthropological commentary, stay tuned.
This week, we've been drawn back to travel once again down the Uxbridge Road to Southall, and we make no apologies for that. As Gerd Baumann, the anthropologist who famously documented Southall in the 1990s, put it, he who is bored on the Broadway, referring, of course, to Southall Broadway, is beyond entertainment. And I think in many ways he was spot on. It's also a place really at the heart of South Asia in West London, as well as being a major food hub. And that makes it a key location for us on the migration menu. So we've come down on the bus from Brunel University in Uxbridge, where we both work, getting down just before the bridge that crosses the Grand Union Canal and which leads directly into Southall Broadway. So we can walk through it and soak up the atmosphere before getting to the restaurant and the restaurateurs whose stories we're featuring in this episode.
And although it's a chilly November evening, it's only about 4:30, but it's already pretty dark, there's a real buzz to it. The traffic's heavy, but there's a lot of footfall and everything's lit up. There are fairy lights around the lampposts and the jewellery shops, with their front windows stuffed with gold, are glistening, giving quite a festive feel to the place.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we're here, usually it's for lunch during the day, right? And although it's always busy, today there's a definite evening vibe to it. In the same way, lots of people that we interviewed felt like they're transported back to South Asia as they walk down the Broadway. To me, it's really evocative of going to the bazaar in the evenings of the local town where I did my fieldwork in South India. I think it's partly about seeing familiar products, buckets and jugs cast from marbled plastic, or aluminium pressure cookers in frayed cardboard boxes, pots and pans, the kinds of stuff that you don't see everywhere else. But there are also the food smells coming from the restaurants and from the sweet shops. There are the stacks of South Asian vegetables outside the greengrocers.
Yeah, it's a real sensorium. And I remember Geeta Ludra, who we featured in the final episode of Series 1, talking about the jalebi stand and her wonderful descriptions of them being swirled majestically into the boiling oil. It's a place that really connects people back to an imagined homeland.
You have to visit Southall to actually experience the multiple layers of it. But it is like a little India, seeped in beautiful fashion, street food, and the street food you can kind of smell as you're walking along the Broadway.
Although our reason for being here today, other than to stop off at Rita's on the way past for a milky filter coffee and at the underground market to chat to the Goan women who work there, who run a food stall where we bought some pickles to take home from. Our other reason for being here is to have dinner at a restaurant that's long since been a Southall institution, even if, as we talk about later, that's about to change. Let's get over to our recording of you, Luke, as we finally get there.
So we've just walked down through the Broadway and Southall past the new Elizabeth line entrance and come through St John's Church and the various community centres towards Brilliance. This amazing sort of double-fronted building looking out over the junction. James, what were your thoughts coming through South?
But before we go in, just to orientate ourselves a bit, we've come down the Broadway, which we've walked down many times, to the crossroads with South Road, the other main shopping street in Southall, and we've walked down it past Madhu's and Saravana Bhavan and the other places we featured on the show, past the station and eventually into Western Road. So we've ended up in a part of the town that we've never really been to before.
That's right. It feels quite far out from what we think of as the centre. And although the Brilliant definitely has the smartest frontage in this part of the street, it still seems a surprisingly modest location for what its owners boast is not only the King's favourite Indian restaurant. King Charles has apparently been here 4 times. It's also the successor to the landmark Brilliant restaurant, nightclub and hotel in mid-20th century Nairobi.
Now, that's a name we've heard before, right? And just to be clear, I'm referring to the Brilliant in Nairobi, not to King Charles, although oddly his name pops up a fair bit in the places that we visited as well.
Yeah. Regular listeners might recall our interview with Sanjay Anand back in Series 1, who's the owner of Madhu's, that we passed on our walk down here in South Road, in which he invokes his grandfather, a guy called Bishan Das Anand, who's the founder of the Brilliant in 1950s Nairobi.
So I was only 10 when we arrived in this country, and it was...
After learning his cooking skills in Kashmir, Bishan Das had travelled from his home in Gujranwala on the border of what later split into India and Pakistan, and he came to Kenya on a dhow boat in the 1930s, where he gradually built up his business over the next 40 years. It was eventually a pretty big outfit, 500 or 600 covers in the restaurant, a hotel and a nightclub. It was pretty well known, and they were a famous family in Nairobi with a major catering business that provided food for South Asian and East African weddings from Mombasa to Kampala.
Now, Bishan Das Anand passed away in 1970, and as we know, by that time things were starting to get a bit tough for South Asian Kenyans in newly post-colonial East Africa. They were given an ultimatum either to give up their British passports, which they had by virtue of living in what had been a British colony, or to become Kenyan citizens. The Kenyan government was also nationalising privately owned businesses. So Bishan Das's sons, Jagdish, Kewal and Gulu, all travelled to the UK.
Now Jagdish, as we know, was the father of Sanjay, who eventually set up Madhu's, and you can hear his part of the story in episode 5 of the last series. It's actually a good companion episode to this one. And Kewal and his other brother, Gulu, set up the Brilliant, which Gulu still runs with his daughter Dipna Anand, who runs the kitchen and who we're also going to meet today, as well as his son Shankar, who deals with the business side of things.
Right, so there's this fascinating intergenerational story here, which takes us from British India in the 1930s to East Africa, and in the 1970s on to the UK. And then we have a new generation that's grown up in Britain, but which retains some of the links that we're going to talk about with a kind of imagined South Asian homeland. One of the things that draws us to it is that it's both a deeply personal story for the individuals involved, but it's also a story that's common to many so-called twice Asia to the UK. But this side of the Anand story is also one that grabbed us for another reason, right?
Yes. One of the things we talked a fair bit about in the last series was gender, particularly the fact that women, although they do feature a lot in the migration stories we heard, often remain very much in the background. So, a woman behind the counter is often the first point of contact we have when we go to a restaurant and talk to them about doing an interview for the podcast. But in most cases, they go on to put us in touch with their bosses or the restaurant owners, who were practically always men. And lots of those men, in turn, talked about the important work of their mothers and the work that they'd done in the kitchen or the recipes that they provided. But in almost every case, they remain nameless.
That's right. But we have been keen to include the voices of more women in the South Asian food business. And at the Brilliant, although we've come in part at least to meet one of the founders of the restaurant, Gulu Anand, we've also got his daughter, Dipna Anand, who now plays a key role in running the business and, as we'll find out, in expanding it in very new directions. And I don't think anyone could ever accuse her of hiding in the shadows.
Yeah, I think one of the things we see with this new generation of restaurateurs, the sons and daughters of South Asian diaspora caterers who've grown up in the UK, is that they really push the envelope in new ways. It's about reimagining what an Indian or Punjabi or Nepalese or whatever restaurant can be. With Arjun, the son of Sanjay at Madhu's, it's been about expansion outside of the UK and about launching their famous high chai, an Indian version of the quintessentially English high tea, at top-end restaurants in central London and Hertfordshire. But with Dipna, it's something a bit different, right?
Right. But before we get to that, let's first get into the restaurant and hear her dad, Gulu, give us his take on the history of this restaurant. As we hear, the Brilliant brand played a significant part in marking Kenya's independence from the British.
My father got a contract for the celebrations of the independence in Kenya in 1963, where we cooked food for about 80,000 people every day, breakfast, lunch and dinner. And those celebrations went for nearly 4 weeks, so that's nearly a month. And that actually set even a stronger foundation for the Brilliance. Then the following year, again, Kenya became a republic. We got a similar contract again for about 80,000 people for about 2 weeks. Again, breakfast, lunch and dinner. So yeah, it was a very popular restaurant. We had our presidents, your MPs, your dignitaries coming to eat out there. Then we came into this country in the early 70s because we were all holding British passports.
Right, yeah.
So we were British citizens because Kenya was a British colony. And slowly set up this restaurant in 1975.
So almost 50 years ago.
Yeah, 50 years today, yeah.
But Gulu had already learned the business whilst in Kenya, the same way his father had learned it decades earlier back in Kashmir.
I learned by watching my father. I used to come from school, rather than going home, I used to go to the restaurant where my father used to be cooking. So I used to watch him, and I picked up my sort of passion from my father. Same Dipna has picked up from me. So yeah, it runs in the family. You've got to have that drive in you. Otherwise, if you're just doing for the sake of opening a restaurant and producing some food, you're not going to go very far.
When they first established the Brilliant, Southall, and the UK more generally, was a very different kind of place. The 1970s, as we've talked about before, was a time of major racial tension. It was in 1976, just a year after Brilliant opened, that Southallian Gurdip Singh Chagga was murdered by white racist thugs outside the Dominion Cinema in the Broadway. But improved race relations across the following decades have not been the only change.
Oh my God, this area has changed tremendously. It was a small area where you could find our community. Now, in these 50 years, I've seen the whole concept change. There's so many people, different types of cuisine as well have come into the country, different type of people have come into the country, and to cater for all these people is a very big thing. There are many restaurants in around England, and to be doing good, you've got to be great.
And part of staying on top, as Gulu makes clear, is ensuring that space is given to the next generation to bring about innovation. He turns the conversation towards Dipna, who's yet to join us.
With my daughter, who is one of the leading chefs for Compass Group. So Compass is one of the biggest organizations in the country. And we have a contract in almost all the sporting venues, like the Oval, the cricket clubs, the rugby clubs, the football clubs. So we do all their hospitality. But Dipna, my daughter, who now is a celebrity chef, has brought the name of Brilliant and Indian food to a different level. And we're expanding and making a lot of people aware of what good quality food is all about. Before 50 years, 60 years before, people were just associating Indian food with, oh my God, it's going to be very oily, it's going to be full of oil, full of butter, and it's high, and it's not healthy. But Dipna has changed all that. She's introduced healthy options by reducing the fat quantity into making a good curry. So
Our starters begin to arrive at the table. In addition to the pile of crisp poppadoms with some delicious mint and tamarind chutneys that we've already demolished, there's also a Kenyan-inspired dish called chili mogo, or garlic and chili cassava chips, a plate of samosa chat blast, crushed samosas in chickpea curry, topped off with Bombay mix, yogurt and tamarind, and there's also a classic chicken tikka. Watching the dishes pile up on the table inspires Gulu to tell us about the Kenyan influences behind the menu.
Yeah. So that particular item, it's cassava.
Yes.
That comes from that's a Kenyan recipe. The other thing which we do here is nyama choma. That is barbecued ribs. So that's another dish from Kenya. And the masala chicken, which originated from there, the jeera chicken, the butter chicken, and the chili chicken. Those were my father's recipes from Kenya.
In keeping with the India meets Kenya theme, Xavier Fernandez, the waiter who takes care of us throughout the meal, also brings us a bottle each of Kingfisher, an Indian beer, and Tusker, a Kenyan lager. Both, we agree, pair very well with the food.
We've also now been joined by the star of the show, Dipna Anand, who we asked to fill us in on her own history at the Brilliant.
Cooking is in my DNA. I loved school and I used to try my best in all my academic subjects like maths, English and science, but just was not very good at them. My strength was in my vocational subjects, so I got all my awards at school for PE. So I was netball player of the year and rounders player of the year and loved all that football kind of stuff. And I got my other awards for food technology. So thankfully I was good in food. I got all my A stars. I won my first national award from the British Nutrition Foundation for best food project in the country from, like I said, British Nutrition Foundation, and that was where it all started for me. I got a lot of attention. It was a project focused on low-fat Indian cooking.
It was a project that responded to concerns for her own father's health after he suffered a heart attack a few years back, but also to widely reported high rates of diabetes among the South Asian community in Britain. West London has particularly high rates of the disease, thought to be linked to diet. The project eventually led Dipna introducing a range of lower-fat, healthy eating options to the menu, not something usually associated with Indian restaurants, but certainly something that's very much up there with the zeitgeist. Has she, James asks, taken over from her father?
It's very much a family affair. It's my brother and myself and my dad at the helm of the business. And we keep saying we are following in our father's footsteps because he is the mastermind that runs the ship.
Proud father Gulu interrupts at this point to insist that it's Dipna who has brought in new ideas that have really improved the business. She has a regular slot on Saturday Morning Kitchen with TV chef James Martin.
It's not all, because I'm here in the outside kitchen with a woman who's become a true friend of the show from the brilliant restaurant Southall, Dipna Anand.
She's also written cookery books. She runs a cookery school from the restaurant. And with 80,000 followers on Instagram and a YouTube channel, she also has a sizable social media following. And a bar and a restaurant that bears her name in Milton Keynes. But it's thanks to her father, she says, that she's been able to do so well.
I had a really good start with, Dad starting the business. So that was a head start for us, because without that, there would be nothing. There wouldn't be any books, there wouldn't be any TV shows, there wouldn't be. Of course, we continue to work hard, but you have to remember where you started and who helped you climb that ladder. And that's another thing as a family. No matter who we meet, one thing I always say is we keep our feet firmly and humbly on the ground, because that helps you grow. So I always get lots of fans come up to me and asking for photos and giving me the most amount of praise that I could ever hear, which is so nice to hear. But actually, it's not you that makes yourself, it's the people that make you.
I ask her, when you come from such a distinguished line of master chefs from whom you've inherited these amazing recipes, how do you put your own mark on the food you produce? There's a lot to live up to.
How do you push the envelope creating?
I mean, like, even till date,
question, but,
no, till date we experiment with flavors and food. A lot of the recipes that we have here on the restaurant menu are my grandfather's recipes. So what we don't want to do is tweak them so much. I mean, of course, we can condense the level of oils and ghees used, etc. But I think there's a very fine line. So we have those dishes which are very traditional. But if I try a new dish and we really like it, we put that on the specials or we put it on the menu. And then there were some dishes that recently we've had to take off the menu that were not selling very well. So although it was my grandfather's creation, things like the chicken keema, we've had to take them off because people have now started to like the more casual style dishes and street food dishes. But the main favourites we still very much have on the menu, like our masala chicken, like our onion bhajis, like our aloo tikki. Those are my grandfather's recipes and are definitely going to be there to stay on the Brilliant menu, because that's where the story comes from, right? And people like to hear that. So if you tell a customer that dish that you're eating was my grandfather's recipe created over 75 years ago, automatically in their mind you've created a story, you've created a buzz, and they can't wait to try, you know. So as a family and as a business, we get a lot of publicity because of that. You know, there's one thing telling a story, but then when they come here and experience and live that story for themselves, they become part of our Brilliant family, you know. And that's
Gulu still likes spice on everything, and if Dipna would let him, would still eat samosas for breakfast every morning. Dipna confesses that, like others of her generation who have grown up in Britain, her own tastes are more diverse.
No, you know, I'll let you into a secret. And I talk to journalists all the time and they say, Dipna, are you sure you want us to include that? And I was like, oh yeah, I'm not ashamed of it, you know. I love KFC. And, you know, I love a doner kebab and chips. And I was speaking to one of my chef friends recently, who's also in the public eye, and he was like, chefs that say they don't eat junk food are not telling the truth, because we all do. Like, we love it. I love a KFC. In fact, my dad calls me a really bad advertisement to my business because he can eat Indian food for breakfast, lunch and dinner, whereas I won't eat it. Like, I'll eat it maybe once a week.
At home, her mother often cooks. Dinner might be a spaghetti bolognese, a favourite for several British South Asians we've interviewed, gammon and chips, or a Sunday roast. But when Dipna's cooking at an event, her go-to is often a salad or a fresh sandwich. Although she's also partial to a bowl of Frosty cereal, however, she can still be tempted by an Indian breakfast at the weekend.
It was good, but on a Sunday, like sometimes at my house, we have a traditional Indian dish called aloo puri, which is like a Bombay potato curry with fried bread. So that's our naughty treat on a Sunday, or stuffed parathas with potatoes. So yummy.
Our own dinner, like the Anand's family breakfast, is resolutely drawn from a list of South Asian favourites. When Xavier Fernandez delivers it to the table, there's one of the Brilliant signature dishes of masala chicken, finished with a swirl of cream. There's a mixed vegetable jalfrezi and a dal makhani, a creamy dish of lightly spiced black lentils. It all comes with a basket of fresh, hot naan and a bowl of pilau rice studded with peas.
It's nice we can have that in the thing,
yeah. And this is the atmosphere of the Brilliant, you know?
It's great, yeah.
We want to make your experience nothing less than brilliant. And people who come here experience that, you know, that brilliance.
Well, another great feed and a great atmosphere in the restaurant, even on a Wednesday night in November.
Yeah, as they said, it's very much a destination venue. People apparently come from all over the world to eat here. And it's quite noticeable, I think, when you look around at the other diners, that it's a very mixed crowd in here compared to what you might see in other restaurants in Southall. I mean, I think it was the first time since we got on the bus that we encountered other white people, for example. And there were lots of tables of families and groups who had clearly come in to celebrate something, like a birthday. So in a way, it doesn't really matter that it's kind of tucked away in this very unprepossessing street, you know, opposite a Best One newsagent come money exchange place, and it's sandwiched between an undertaker's and another chicken shop. They aren't really depending here on passing trade. It's a place that people come to especially.
Yes, and when you get inside, it's also like walking into another world. As you know, I like to comment on the decor of all the places that we go into, in part just to show how far Indian restaurants have moved on from the days of red flock wallpaper. Here, the walls are painted in copper with kind of silver patina over the top. The chairs are covered in orangey brown leather, and the tables are sort of black quartz, kind of classy but understated.
Yeah, we thought the colour scheme and the covers of the menus, which looked like some kind of animal print to us, were references to the restaurant's East African heritage. But I think that might have just been us getting a bit carried away.
There is, though, a social media wall, which, of course, we had our photos taken in front of with Gulu and Dipna for our Instagram pages. It's a real sign, I think, of the direction they've taken business in. People who were sitting at tables around us clearly recognised her as a celebrity. Her face is on the cookery books that you can buy from the counter near the door. And although they probably wouldn't come if the food was no good, it's not just the food they come for. There's a celebrity component to it also.
Yeah, definitely. They've had Gordon Ramsay here filming with them for one of his own TV shows. And as we've mentioned earlier, they make a point in their publicity of describing the restaurant as King Charles's favourite Indian restaurant. So in that sense, it's probably as far away as you could get from the classic small-town Indian restaurant that you pick up a takeaway from on a Saturday night or whatever.
Right. And there's also something about taking Indian cooking into the celebrity chef space. I guess there was Madhu Jeffrey pioneering that in the early 1980s. But before and after that, most celebrity chefs in the UK have been white people cooking mostly European dishes. You know, you had the Galloping Gourmet, as the Canadian chef Graham Kerr's show was called on TV in the late 1960s and early 1970s.
Yeah, I'm showing my age here, but I did used to watch the Galloping Gourmet sometimes with my mum. Have you seen it?
It's a little bit before my time, James, but I know of it. And then you had Delia Smith, and moving into the 1990s, people like Gary Rhodes, Gordon Ramsay, Nigella Lawson and Jamie Oliver. So there's certainly space in the market for someone like Dipna who can also legitimately claim a certain kind of authenticity based on the Brilliance history.
Yeah, and interestingly, when some of the other celebrity chefs that you've mentioned there, actually, when they've tried to cook the food of Asia or Africa, they've often got themselves into hot water. I remember a news story, I guess it was about a decade ago, when Jamie Oliver got into trouble for publishing his own version of jollof rice. You know, lots of people took to social media to decry his recipe as inauthentic. You also had Nigella Lawson stirring up similar controversy when she offered her own interpretation of bhorta, which is a Bengali speciality, and we're going to try it later in this series, which she made, I think, from fish fingers, and which are also the wrong shape. So Dipna has been very clever, I think, in positioning herself in that space.
And it also says something interesting about the generational differences between those first-generation South Asian restaurateurs, people like Gulu and his brothers, and their children who've joined in the family business. They're much more willing to move beyond the sort of South Asian space, as you call it, James. Whether that's putting an Indian twist on the English high tea, as Dipna's cousin Arjun has done, or whether it's expanding the market beyond the restaurant to cookery books, a cookery school, TV appearances, and so on. It's about recognising herself and her family rather than, as would have been the case in the past, just the restaurant as the brand.
It's also interesting, I think, to see how that connection to food shifts across the generations. So for Gulu's generation, cooking South Asian food was much more about connecting back to a homeland. For their kids, born in the UK, it was the food they ate at home, so it was still important, perhaps, to their sense of identity. But it was also a cuisine eaten alongside all kinds of other things, which might have been KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, spaghetti bolognese, roast dinners, things that have come up surprisingly often as favourites of the younger generations of South Asian diasporas that we've spoken to while doing this. And it's perhaps as much about belonging to the place they call home, the UK, as it is about nostalgia for an imagined homeland. And the great thing here, I think, is that there isn't that sense of having to choose. You don't have to give up those connections to another place, to ancestral homes in Pakistan, India, or East Africa, in order to feel also part of a new country. At least I hope that's how Dipna feels, that it's actually okay to love both aloo paratha or whatever and fish and chips.
Yes, indeed. And it's worth pointing out, I think, that you also see these changes in India. In your own book, James, Sacred Cows and Chicken Manchurian, there's a lovely bit in the second chapter where you talk about how changing technologies, things like having fridges, which people in villages often didn't have access to until quite recently, and access to the internet, have enabled people to experiment much more than in the past with what they eat. That might mean using industrialized foods more than in the past, like Maggi noodles, for example, which have become popular. But there's also a bit in your book where you describe going to lunch at someone's house, and that young woman who's cooked for you has not only used her mother's recipes, she's also made things she's learned to cook on YouTube.
Yeah, and potentially, I guess, she'd now even have access to some of Dipner's recipes on YouTube. So the possibility of cuisines influencing one another is much greater than it used to be in the past. You don't have to cross the Indian Ocean in a dhow boat for your curry to take on East African influences anymore, or travel the trade route between Yemen and India, to come up with the mandi biryani.
And the other thing they've plugged into here is the Brilliant is the healthier food market. The menu has several lower fat options on it. So here you still have the benefits of the grandfather's recipes that developed in Kashmir and the Punjab and amended in Kenya. But you also have new tweaks to those recipes, which keep them fresh in, if you'll pardon the cliche, a rapidly changing world. Dipner also wasn't afraid to take dishes off the menu that were popular in her grandfather's time if they no longer sold.
Indeed, and I think she's also pulled off the trick of taking Southall out of Southall, as it were, both in the sense of bringing non-Southallians in to eat at the restaurant or to take courses at her cookery school or whatever, but also to showcase Southall and all the things it has to offer on Saturday morning TV or on Instagram and these other places on social media. She's taking Southall out to a much bigger audience.
Yes, I think you're right. The new generation, when they're taking on their parents' and their grandparents' businesses, are casting their nets much wider, whilst at the same time remaining very respectful of the legacies for their forefathers gave them, basically. It's a delicate balancing act, and it's one that's both about business, in that it obviously they want to do well, but it's also about their own identities.
Yeah, which kind of goes some way to explain the news that we received a few weeks after eating in the Brilliant, that they're actually closing the restaurant after 50 years to open a new one called Brilliant Gastro in what's called Southall's Green Quarter, which is a regeneration project on the site of the former gasworks, which was demolished a few years ago. And the menu will combine dishes that stay true to the family's Punjabi Kenyan roots with the kind of Western classics that Dipner also loves.
So another place for us to try out. For now, though, I'm just glad that we got to eat in one of Southall's landmark institutions and mark its passing with the Migration Menu episode before it closed its doors for the very last time.
Me too. But that's all we've got time for today, so it's goodbye from us, and we'll see you again soon on
The Migration Menu.
Go well. In addition to all the episodes of Series 1, on our website you can access images of the food that we were served, video footage, and a host of other learning resources. So please have a look, have a listen, and do send us your comments and questions to info@themigrationmenu.com.